Hello, and welcome to the Friday Night Author Roundtable. I'm your host, Chris Baker, and during the next half hour, we'll be speaking with several very talented authors about their newly released books, what their inspiration was for creating their unique stories, and why it would be a great book to read and share with your friends and family. We all go through struggles and trials and tribulations in our life, and one of the keys to getting through those sometimes is hearing about how other people get through theirs, and I think that's what we have at the heart of this next book on the Friday Night Author Roundtable. The book is called How to Survive with Your Mind by author Anjel B Zabek from Christian Faith Publishing. Angel, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Now tell everybody a little about your book.
The book is primarily the prologue of how I was raised and how I see and understand the world from the point of view of my parents and those that are ingrained in the religious community of my father's faith. It is an experience for myself, but a steady therapy for those that appreciate the book with their time to understand its content.
Now, what inspired you to write this book? Where did that all kind of begin?
My inspirations to write this book began with my mother. Before I was born, she had a dream. And after I was born, she kept talking to me about the dream. And as I got older, she never stopped talking about the dream. Her final days, she died of lung cancer. Before she took her last breath, she told me not to forget the dream. And she inspired me. She told me, I want you to write about this when I'm gone. That's where my inspiration comes from.
Now, if you're talking about like a target audience, who's the reader that you really want to see your book get into the hands of?
Women are my target readers from the age of 18 and all the way up. I humbly think they would appreciate my title because they might begin to find themselves in a similar experience. It is somewhat of a guide, somewhat of another voice telling them their story so they may reflect on it. I might be able to go as far as to say that this series can be a woman's art of war.
Now, how was it for you working with Christian Faith Publishing to get this book published and to be able to share your message and your story?
Working with Christian Faith was a long process. To tell you, Chris, I have started the manuscript for this book 10 years ago, and I decided to wait for that divine intervention. So Christian Faith helped me in a way where to get the listeners, the public, to have the opportunity to read my book.
Now, is this something you think you might do again? Maybe a follow-up to this down the road, or are you working on anything new?
Definitely. There's more to come.
Well, excellent. We look forward to that. Now, when people read this book, How to Survive with Your Mind, what do you hope is the most important message they get from reading your story?
The most important message they will get from reading the story is never give up. There's always a way.
But I tell you what, that is an excellent message, and this is a kind of message that we all need to hear. The book is called How to Survive with Your Mind by author Anjel B Zabek from Christian Faith Publishing. Get your copy today, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, online, as well as at the brick-and-mortar stores, just a handful of the locations. And Angel, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Chris, for having me.
This next book on the Friday Night Author Roundtable, I think, is going to be a fascinating look at the gospel that Jesus actually preached when he walked on the earth. The book is called Restoring and Transforming, Restoring the Gospel of the Kingdom and Transforming Society by author Andrew Ferguson from Christian Faith Publishing. Andrew, thank you for being on the show.
Great, glad to be on, Chris.
Now tell everybody about your book.
Well, this book is kind of an expose on the gospel from a full biblical perspective, from the Old Testament to the New Testament, so that people can see the connection of the gospel that is presented throughout the Bible and connects with what was said about Jesus when it said that he came preaching the gospel of the kingdom. And I don't think that's the gospel that most people understand.
Now, what inspired you to write this book? Where did this idea come from?
Well, there's actually two stories to answer that question. The first is, it was kind of a surprise. I had been thinking about writing several books, but I was at a conference one time, and a lady sitting across the table from me who I'd never known, found out later she was a prophetess. She pointed a finger at me and says, "You got a book you're supposed to write." And I just felt something deep inside of me agree with that. But I didn't know. I kind of thought through the titles I had planned, and none of them were it. And then 2 nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night, 2:30, and I got the download for this book, every chapter and a summary, and I got up and wrote for about 4 hours, and the outline was complete, and then it took me 6 months to complete the book. The second story I would say is, in answer to that question, is that it's been a life of observing the church, both from within as a pastor and years stepping outside as a layman, just kind of concerned and curious about the state of the church and why was it more effective in people's lives as well as in society around us. And so this is my response to that, and what I believe the biblical response to that is.
Now, when you wrote this, did you have anyone in particular in mind as a target audience?
Yeah, again, twofold. One is, I think there are a lot of people out there that are, curious about the church. That, I heard a lot as a pastor and as a layman that there are people who, think the church is hypocrites and, why would I go to church? It's just a bunch of people sit around. So I wanted to give them a different perspective of the church. But I also wanted to challenge and inspire pastors and lay people to have a more dynamic, healthy view of their role as the body of Christ in society and what the Bible really teaches about the gospel of the kingdom.
Now, how was your experience working with Christian Faith Publishing to be able to get this book published and to be able to get this message out there?
Yeah, it was excellent. They did a great job of walking me through the process and guiding me through, the steps and, pretty efficient in terms of getting stuff back and forth. So I was really glad to have an assistance in this. I had thought about self-publishing, but this was a much better path for me.
Now, this book, Restoring and Transforming, when people read this, what do you hope is the most important message they get from this book?
There's a congruent message from the Old Testament through the New Testament that God didn't suddenly change because Jesus came. He had a plan. I call it the meta story. It talks about the whole congruent message, and that they learn that the gospel is something much more than their personal salvation and being able to go to heaven when they die. That Jesus is actually the head of a kingdom. He's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he desires his kingdom be lived out here and represented by his church. And so I hope people find out what the kingdom is really about, and that gives them more to live for, and therefore causes them to have a greater impact on the society around them.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think this is a fascinating book and an eye-opening book to the bigger picture of the gospel, and I think everyone's really going to learn a lot from this. The book is called Restoring and Transforming, Restoring the Gospel of the Kingdom and Transforming Society by author Andrew Ferguson from Christian Faith Publishing. You can pick up your copy today, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, online, the brick-and-mortar stores, just a few of the locations. And Andrew, thank you for being on the show.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
Have you ever felt this way, where things are going wrong and you can't understand why they keep happening and things feel hopeless? Well, there is hope, and I think this next book is a great testimony to that. The book is called A Song of Love, How Jesus Breathes Life into Destiny by author Jan Chapman from Christian Faith Publishing. Jan, thank you for being on the show.
Hey, thank you for having me, Chris.
Now tell everybody a little about your book.
I have been walking into a lot of what God is wanting me to see and how his character is really beautiful. And I kept having amazing supernatural things happen. And the more I tried to figure out what it was about, the more I kept running into God. And so I'm sure many can relate to this. And once my heart heard the truth that everyone who believes in him will have eternal life, I really felt a strong need to tell everybody that truth. And the Lord just kept telling me, Jan, these bad things happening to you, they're all going to be your testimony because I am using you to show everyone how good I really am.
Now, how was it for you as an author to be able to take what you've gone through? Because I have to imagine it probably had to be pretty personal, and to be able to, one, share that with everybody, and then two, know that you're probably going to be helping a lot of people with your testimony. How was it as an author being inspired to do that?
What was really an interesting part of it was I kept asking God, because part of what I went through was I didn't feel I was worthy enough to have Almighty God come and ask me to write a book. And so I asked God, I said, God, I'm just a person in the world. What am I going to do? And he said, one person can do a lot. Look at Jesus himself. And so what I ran into was the more I would tell people in person of my stories, the more I realized they needed to hear it. And the hard part was realizing I had to share the pain and relive the pain in order to write about it. So it was both very emotional, but also very freeing because through the whole process, God had healed me. And now I'm at a point where I keep walking into what God is telling me step by step, and more beautiful things are happening. Even though we go through trials, God is there no matter what. So the ability to encourage others and tell them how true God is just so amazing. And, he wouldn't tell me that or give me visions about it unless it was true. So God is far more amazing than we think.
Now, how was it working with Christian Faith Publishing to get this book published and to be able to share your story?
Well, the great thing was, as I struggled with even getting a book out, they were very, very encouraging. They understood the challenges that I was going through because not only working a full-time job, but writing can be very, very taxing on your strength and energy just to do things every day. And I remember when I was trying to meet deadlines, I would have, a 40-hour week and then, another 40 hours trying to go through what I had to review and return back to the publisher. So they were really, really understanding and very encouraging. I can't say enough about how much they just helped me through the process.
When people read this, what do you hope is the most important message that they get from your story?
I really, really hope that people can understand the power of God to help them get free of barriers and chains in their own lives. I think a lot of people believe when bad things happen that they can't recover from it, that they have no way out, that they're trapped. And the truth is, even when you're really, really going through things, you're really sad, to turn around and be able to thank God for what He did because He uses everything for good. It's a whole different perspective. I had no idea all the good that would come into my life because I was hit by a semi-truck. No idea. And there are so many things that happened because of that moment in time. And to know that that's how God will come to you is in the depths of your worst moments, that to me is the epitome of hope in God.
Oh, that's such a wonderful message that we all need to hear because, sometimes we need that reminder that God does have a plan. Even though we may not understand how it's playing out, He always has a plan, and there is that hope. And I think people are going to find that in this testimony. The book is called A Song of Love, How Jesus Breathes Life into Destiny by author Jan Chapman from Christian Faith Publishing. I encourage everyone, pick up your copy, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, online, the brick and mortar stores, just a few of the locations. And Jan, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it.
If you love a fascinating, multifaceted story with the interesting characters, I think you're going to love this next book on the Friday Night Author Roundtable. The book is called Tares Among the Wheat by author H. Melvin James from Fulton Books. Mel, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, tell everybody a little about this story.
Well, the book is about a story within a story. The outer story that begins the book is only 10 months in the year 1970, and it concerns a widowed young woman she's a young mother, and she has an unfortunate accident and goes into a coma. During that 10 months, she's visited in the hospital by a mysterious stranger who tells her stories of her ancestors. And so that opens up the frame story that roughly covers the period from 1890 to 1970, where the two stories converge at the end.
Now, what inspired you to write this story? Where did that all kind of start?
From my early childhood, growing up on a farm, all of my aunts and uncles, my grandparents were all farmers. And my grandparents were all homesteaders in the Oklahoma land run of 1893. They were mixed different countries of origin, and they married, and so one grandfather was Czech Republic. The grandmother he was married to was full-blooded Irish. My other grandparents were German and Dutch, and so they all had their own traditions and their own fables and that sort of thing, and they liked to tell stories. And they were a colorful lot. They told lots of stories about their homesteading, their pioneering, their immigration to America, and I was fascinated by that. So once I retired, I finally had time to write down and start thinking about including that sort of stories into a book that was not a copy of their experiences, but was patterned after those experiences.
Now, how was it working with Fulton Books to get this book published and to be able to share this story?
I've been very delighted and pleased with my publisher. I retired from 40 years in industry. I've worked with lots of contracts, and I was pleased to find a company that gave a contract that was straightforward and reasonable, and even more pleased when they fulfilled every part of that contract. Beyond the written agreement, though, the people I worked with at Fulton Books were helpful and friendly, considerate, and that was in addition to their being knowledgeable and professional. I don't think I could have chosen a better publisher, especially this being my first novel. I
know this is Volume 1. What can we expect from Volume 2, and are you working on anything new right now?
Volume 2 has been released last month.
Oh, excellent.
So the 2 volumes are out there. Collectively, there are 1,258 pages of what I think is very entertaining reading. I've started to get some reviews back on my book, and they're very positive. I am working on another book. The next book is going to be quite different from this novel. It's going to be a classical detective story written in first person. And again, I'm going to write, as the old advice is, about something I know. This is a murder mystery that takes place on an isolated military base in the Arctic Circle. I look forward to writing that book.
Oh, excellent. That sounds exciting. I can't wait for that now. Now, this book, Tares Among the Wheat, when people read this, what do you hope is the most important thing they get from it, the most important message here?
I think the overall message is perseverance, hope, faith, and keep trying, and in the end, things will work out. Life goes on. And part of that struggle is not only for oneself, but for people that follow you, whether they be your descendants or whether they be your neighbors or your fellow countrymen.
Well, that's a fantastic message, and I think this is going to be a fantastic read and an interesting read, and I encourage everyone to pick up their copy. The book is called Tares Among the Wheat, Volume 1. Of course, Volume 2 also out as well, by author H. Melvin James from Fulton Books. You can pick up your copy today, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, Google Play, online, as well as at the brick-and-mortar stores, just a few of the locations. And Mel, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
This next book on the Friday Night Author Roundtable, a book I'm really interested to find out more about. The book is called Life is Funny, Sometimes It's Not, by author Frank Penley from Christian Faith Publishing. Frank, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, man, thank you, Chris, for having me.
Now, tell everybody a little about your book.
Chris, this book came from my life. I've worked with people's problems for 40 years, and in the things I've discussed and went through with people, I've come to the conclusion that there are certain things in life that no matter how different we are, everybody goes through some of the same things. For example, love, hate, bitterness, brokenness, healing. You can go down on things that we've all experienced in different ways. And in that process or thinking, I came up with the thought of things in my life that I'd went through that were extremely unique, but yet there are certain events I went through that everybody's going to go through that same type pain or that same type fun. And so I just felt by my wife's compelling that I should sit down and write the stories that kind of open up to everybody, things we can all relate to. It's basically about life.
Now, how was it for you as an author to be able to take, something that you've experienced and share this with the world to help people realize that they're not alone in what they're going through as well? How was that to be able to do something that impactful?
That was not my intention, but it's kind of what has happened, Chris. My wife and I decided one night that there were certain things that happened in my life and getting through those experiences that we needed to share with my children and my grandchildren. And so we actually prayed about it and thought about it, and I ended up just sitting down over the process of 2.5 years and writing down things I wanted my children and grandchildren to know. And then I was trying to think of how do you title something like this, and the thought, life is funny sometimes. Sometimes it's not. And that's what I've jotted down, and we've come up with life is funny. Sometimes it's not. The title of the book is a definition of my attempt, and that is that all of us have times in life that's funny. We also have times in life that's not. But you know what? This thing that we call life, it isn't just during the good times that life is amazing. Life is amazing. We just have to go through the pendulum swing of life, several different emotions, but it's still a great thing to experience.
Now, how was it working with Christian Faith Publishing to get this book published and to be able to share it?
It was amazing. There was a lady with Christian Faith Publishing named Judy, And see, I never intended to publish this book. I wrote this for my children, and my daughter-in-law, who is an illustrator for several publishers, asked me to send it to publishers. And I had no idea. I didn't know anything about this. So she helped me, and we sent some of the book to 7 publishers, and 2 of the 7 wanted it. So when we looked at the approach that they came to me with contract, Christian Faith Publishing was the most fair and balanced, and I met this lady, Judy, talked with her, and she just helped me. She helped me with it in a way that was not trying to buy me or sell me or anything else. She just opened up and shared with me, took the time to talk to me, and she convinced me to go with it. Christian Faith Publishing has been awesome.
And when people read this book, Life is Funny, Sometimes It's Not, what do you hope is the most important thing they get from it, the most important message?
The 3 things I hope they get is faith, laughter, and love, and the ability to increase the output of that in their life as well as receive it from others. That's where we're going.
Oh, that's such a fantastic message, and I think everybody's going to gain a lot of that and a whole lot more from this book. The book is called Life is Funny, Sometimes It's Not, by author Frank Penley. And, of course, you've got a website and some things going on. You want to talk about that for a second?
Thank you so much. We have an awesome event coming up in Charlotte on February the 20th. We're having a book launch for anyone that wants to buy it exclusive. We're going to sell 130 tickets. And for everyone that comes, we're going to have a wine tasting, a jazz band, and we're going to sit around and kind of fellowship and talk about life experiences, not just mine. And it's just going to be a great time. My webpage, frankpenley.com, Frank, Penley.com, will give all that information. And you can also buy the book it's an ebook. It's also on the webpage. But listen, Chris, thank you so much for this time.
Yeah, you can pick up this book at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, online, the brick-and-mortar stores. Those are just a handful of the locations. And again, Frank, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, Chris, man, I can't wait to meet you in person and have a cup of coffee with you. Thank you, buddy.
It's sad that so many people go without in our nation in this day and age and go hungry. And if you've ever felt the calling to do something about it, I think this next book on the Friday Night Author Roundtable is going to be an excellent resource to do just that. The book is called Feeding the Multitudes by author Crystal M. Davis from Christian Faith Publishing. Crystal, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Now tell everybody about your book.
Well, Feeding the Multitudes was written to help those who have a deep desire to reach out to the needy and hungry, with an emphasis on helping them to open a non-for-profit. I remember my first struggles in 1988 when I opened a Community Hope Center, Cottage Hills, and doing all the non-for-profit paperwork and all. I only could find those types of books that were written by lawyers for lawyers, and there wasn't really something tangible. So I did take a while to be able to incorporate. That's why I stepped out in faith to write this personal, practical guide to equip people with the answer they need to open a not-for-profit with an emphasis of course, on the food pantry ministry.
And taking the experiences you had gone through in this area and putting this down into a book, what kind of inspired you to start that process and share the information you've accumulated?
Well, I had been writing my life story in a book, and I was kind of like trying to get that worked out in 2004 when I felt the Lord speak to my heart. Put that aside and first write Feeding the Multitudes to help those who need this type of guidance.
Now, how was it for you working with Christian Faith Publishing to be able to get this book published and to be able to get this message spread?
Well, that's probably what took me so long in getting it published, was because I couldn't find the right publisher. And I would be frustrated, one, for the lack of stuff that they provided. My relationship with Christian Faith Publishing has been wonderful. That's why the book is written, because they offered so much more than any other publisher I'd ever been acquainted with.
Now, is this something you'd like to do again? Are you working on anything new?
I am. That original book I was writing, I am now writing it.
Oh, excellent.
So that's in the process right now.
Well, we look forward to that now. Now, this book, Feeding the Multitudes, when people read this, what do you hope is the most important message or the most important thing they gain from this book?
Well, probably the aspect of how when you step out and you start feeding the multitudes exactly like Jesus did. He gave his disciples, a little bit of fish, a little bit of bread, told them to spread it out. God will give to the giver everything they need to be able to feed the multitudes, like the parable of the loaves and fishes. It really works. God multiplies what you have to help those in need. Many are called into the health ministry and do not know how to begin. So feeding the multitudes is really going to catapult them into their ministry.
Oh, that's such a wonderful thing, because so many people go without, and so many people want to help, but just don't have the right guidance. I think this book is going to be an excellent resource to give people the guidance they need. The book is called Feeding the Multitudes by author Crystal M. Davis from Christian Faith Publishing. I encourage everyone, pick up your copy today. Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, online, as well as at the brick and mortar stores. Those are just a few of the locations. And Crystal, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for the Friday Night Author Roundtable. We'll be back next week with another great group of talented authors to discuss their books, their process, and their accomplishments. Have a great weekend, everyone.